This manuscript explores life, death, what lies beyond, all through the lens of classical physics. This process of exploration is a journey in itself. And we have already started on this journey by taking first few steps in our previous session. In this session, let us explore what and how we radiate through our energy self. What are the brain waves? What happens when we think and express? In our previous session, we discussed about visualization of human energy field and how the heart becomes the central component of this energy self. If you haven't seen that session yet, be sure to watch it first. It will provide the context to make everything discussed here clearer. Now, the electromagnetic radiation emerging out from the human body is qualified as brain waves. The table here shows what different frequency ranges forms the brain waves. The delta waves is ranging between the frequency of 0.5 hertz to 4 hertz. It's the frequency that we typically radiate while we are in deep sleep or the body is undergoing through the restoration process. The theta wave ranging between the frequency of 4 hertz to 8 hertz is the frequency that we radiate while we visualize or while we are dreaming. Alpha wave is 8 hertz to 12 hertz, and that's the kind of frequency range that we radiate while we are doing something creative or while we are relaxing. Beta waves, 12 hertz to 30 hertz, is the kind of frequency that we emit in two different cases. One cases is, alertness, concentration, and another cases where we have psychological disturbances going on. The gamma wave is ranging between the frequency of 30 hertz and 100 hertz is again, is the kind of frequency range that we radiate while we are thinking quite hard. We are doing some in-depth thinking. We are reflecting on certain aspects. We are developing an insight, and then also, on a different uh, level of involvement. If we are becoming agitated, if we are, the psychological disturbances are creating extreme stress and anxiety, the gamma waves of 30 hertz, 100 hertz frequency range can also be radiated from human body. So magnetic field generated from us human beings is not static. It's a time varying magnetic field created by time varying electric current and electric field. Static magnetic field won't have a frequency or wavelength. It would just have the strength and direction. But time varying magnetic field would have frequency and wavelength. An oscillating current will produce time varying magnetic field. For example, an alternating current at 50 hertz will produce a magnetic field oscillating at 50 hertz. So the human brain waves are essentially the radiating electromagnetic waves produced due to the time varying electric field and magnetic field developed in human body. The spectrum that you see here on the top of the screen is the overall spectrum of the electromagnetic waves as defined by ITU, International Telecommunication Union, a standard body. And if you see this frequency range, the first segment is called ELF, extremely low frequency range. And within that frequency range, it starts from 0.5 hertz to 3 kilohertz. It goes up to 3 kilohertz. And within this range, the human brainwave segment, the 0.5 hertz to 100 hertz, is the starting period of this ELF range. So the human brainwaves fall under ELF, and it's pretty much the starting section of the ELF segment. And then comes the other higher frequency range segments, And of course, with the frequency going higher, the wavelength decreases. So the ELF frequency range is having the lowest segment of the frequency, but then it also has the maximum wavelength. After ELF, it's the VLF. VLF is it stands for very low frequency. Then LF, low frequency range. Then medium frequency range. Then high frequency range, HF. Then VHF stands for very high frequency range. Then UHF stands for ultra high frequency range. Then SHF, super high frequency range. Then EHF, extremely high frequency range. And then comes the infrared segment. The infrared um, segment subsequently followed by the visible light segment and then the ultraviolet segment. So this is how the overall spectrum is organized, and you can see uh, the human energy field, the frequency range of the brainwave pretty much comes at the starting segment of the overall spectrum. Now, in the world of electronics and communication, we could receive an EM wave by using a simple loop antenna. The mechanism is straightforward. We prepare a loop using conductor material and connect it with a suitable capacitor and prepare some means to couple the signal to a transmission line. Now, when an electromagnetic wave passes through, it induces a current on the conductor loop. And that current could be traced and used for reconstructing the electric field of same characteristics that were originally used to generate and transmit the electromagnetic wave. So a suitable loop antenna with highest receiving efficiency demands quite a few specifics, like the size of the loop should be some percentage of the wavelength of the EM wave. The capacitor needs to be of certain capacitance value so that the induced current from the particular frequency of electromagnetic wave could be traced properly, and some other such similar factors. But if we are not trying to design a high efficiency loop antenna, we can ignore these factors. Now, broadly speaking, this same construct of receiving loop antenna is clearly visible in the human circuitry as well. The loops of circulatory system acts like the conductive loops. And when the magnetic field of another person passes through these loops, it would trigger a change of current due to induction. And change of current would get worked out while the ions are flowing through the circulatory system. And if the human being is sensitive enough to feel that delta change of current or flow of ions through the circulatory system, it could sense the receiving signal of other person's brain waves. Usually, a change in the flow of ions would result into a slight bit of change of heart rate, unless the change is entirely negligible. However, since we are not accustomed to notice these subtle changes in our body, we will not be able to perceive these effects mostly, or rather would depend on our more prominent sensory systems to provide us the received signals of the communication. But the fact remains, the changes do occur to our body due to the communicating ELF energy field. And if it is observed closely, it could be perceived and processed as viable received signal of a communication. So if there are no sensory communications going on between two human beings, but both persons are within the purview of their energy fields, one person's brainwave would likely create an effect on the other person. One person's agitation would likely cause similar feelings in other persons if both are in resonating conditions. Possible signs of that would be that one person's increased breathing rate and increased heart rate would make other person's breathing rate and heart rate to increase. Similarly, The same energy influence would work for other end of the brainwave spectrum too. If the two persons are in resonating condition, one person's deep sleep would induce a deep sleep like effect on the other person. This energy influence covers all the five different levels of brainwave spectrum. And that is also one of the reasons why group activities with like minded people introduce better results. So, a brainwave driven subtle communication would temporarily change the electromagnetic footprint of the human being. It would also temporarily change the heart rate, or it would originate from it, from the change of heart rate. And it would also temporarily change the breathing, or it would be caused due to the scenarios arising from the change of breathing. As already said before, the prominence of our sensory modes of communication would always suppress this subtle form of communication. And this would always be the subtle form of communication would always be going on in parallel. However, there could still be few exceptional human beings who would be sensitive enough and attentive enough to detect and recognize these subtle signals. And for them, we may have a well known terminology for this mode of communication. It is called telepathy. Does this sound familiar? All right. Before we end this session, here is an important reminder. Life is a beautiful and precious gift. It's so valuable that often the value is incomprehensible in the narrower context of few life experiences and situations. But it becomes comprehensible if the value of life is seen in much deeper and truer context. This effort attempts to capture that deeper and truer context that people who have scientific and logical bent of mind can understand. The scientific elaborations here are basic in nature so that it becomes easier to comprehend. But the science behind life and beyond are much more intrinsic in nature, much more complex and subtle. So use these basic understanding to conceptualize the deeper and truer context of life, but please don't misuse these to carry out experiments on yourself or others. You and your conscience both are far more valuable than that. We will develop the line of thinking further in the subsequent sessions. Keep watching.